Hello and welcome to the piece covering Pojmans' argument for the death penalty. In this piece we'll be covering Pojmans' version of Vandenhaeg's best bet argument in favor of the death penalty, in which he argues that we should favor having the death penalty because, all things considered, it is the best bet for saving the most lives. That said, let's move on. One of the most common arguments given in support of the death penalty for crimes such as murder is that it acts as a deterrent to other murderers. This is a consequentialist argument. That is to say that the argument in support of the death penalty relies on there being good consequences that result from using the death penalty. Pojman begins his paper by pointing out that statistics regarding whether or not the death penalty reduces violent crimes such as murder are up in the air. According to Pojman, studies do not conclusively show that the death penalty reduces violent crime rates, but they also do not show that the death penalty does not reduce violent crime rates. This last bit is especially important for Pojman's argument. Pojman isn't saying about the evidence that good studies have been done and that they show evidence of no deterrent effect. If that were the case, then there would be a good reason to believe that the death penalty does not deter crime. Pojman instead believes that the difficulties in assessing the death penalty are such that evidence regarding whether or not the death penalty reduces crime rates is inconclusive. The death penalty might deter other murders, and it might not. And since we have to have a policy regarding the death penalty, we either have it or we do not, we have to bet one way or another. Data regarding the effectiveness of the death penalty as a deterrent is hard to come by because there are relatively few executions over a relatively long period of time when many other variables are also important contributing factors. For example, a state might reinstitute the death penalty and then in the next few years see a rise in crime. Did the crime rate go up because of the death penalty, or did it go up because the economy got worse, or because there was particularly hot weather and violent crimes go up in the heat? Or because there was a large movement of people from rural areas to the cities where there's more violent crime? Would the crime rate have been even higher without the death penalty? With so many variables, it's very difficult to tell with so little data. Pojman does, however, seem to indicate that he thinks that there is some evidence that the death penalty deters crime, and he also believes that there are additional common sense reasons to think that the death penalty deters crime, which we will discuss later. So, Pojman says that we are in the position of not knowing whether the death penalty reduces murder rates or not, but we are forced in some sense to bet one way or another. If we adopt the use of the death penalty, we are betting that it does deter crime at the cost of the lives of some convicted murderers. If we do not use the death penalty, then we are betting that it does not deter crime, sparing the lives of those convicted murderers, but risking the lives of innocent victims of those murderers that would have been deterred if we are wrong. The way Pojman sees it, betting in favor of the death penalty is betting in favor of the lives of innocents, and betting against the death penalty is betting against them. But one way or another, Pojman says, we have to make a moral choice. If we decide not to act and not have the death penalty, then he says we have some moral responsibility if it is the case that we could have deterred the murder of innocents by acting. In other words, he takes the position that we have some moral responsibility not only for the acts we do, but also for the things we allow to happen. He gives the example of knowing that a bomb was planted in a building but failing to alert anybody in the building or the authorities about it. If one knew that a bomb was likely to go off and could have saved lives by informing others, but chose not to do so, then that person, according to Pojman, is partially responsible for those deaths. In the same way, he thinks that if we know that we have a reasonable chance of saving the lives of innocents by using the death penalty, and fail to do so, we share some of the moral responsibility for the innocents who are murdered by those murderers who would have otherwise been deterred, if the death penalty deters those sorts of crimes. So here's the question. If we grant that we must bet and that we are morally responsible not just for what we do, but for certain things that we allow to happen, what is our best bet regarding the death penalty? To figure this out, we have to make a few assumptions. Pojman asks us to assume that an innocent's life is worth twice as much as that of a murderer's. Pojman says he believes that an innocent's life is worth many times more than that, of a murderer, but for the sake of his argument he says we can suppose that it is only twice as valuable. As mentioned, we do not know if the death penalty does deter murder or not. We will say that the odds are 50-50. But though we don't know whether or not it deters crime, if it does deter crime, Pojman wants us to assume that it will deter 2 murders each time it is used. He thinks that this is a small number. So, taken together, our premises or assumptions are: first, that we are essentially forced to bet, one way or another, on the death penalty by either having it or not having it. Second, that we are morally responsible not just for what we do, but for what we allow to be done. Third, that there is a reasonable chance, something like 50-50, that the death penalty for murders deters other murderers. This is with the additional note that if the death penalty does deter murders, it deters 2 murders every time it is used. And fourth, that the life of an innocent person is worth at least twice as much as that of a murderer. And this is with the additional note of assigning some specific values. We will say that the life of an innocent person is worth 10 and that of a murderer is worth 5. So here's a graph that describes all the outcomes. There are only 4 possibilities, each represented by a box. Either the death penalty works or it does not, and either we use it or we do not. If we use the death penalty and it works to deter crime, then 2 innocent lives are saved and the life of 1 murderer is lost. Together, this is a total of 15 points. Pojman calls this a big win. If we use the death penalty and it does not deter, however, then we have saved no innocents but killed a murderer, so we have a total of -5 points. Pojman calls this a small loss. On the other hand, suppose that we do not use the death penalty. If it would have deterred murder, then we've lost the lives of 2 innocents, which is -20 points. But we also saved the life of a murderer, which is +5 points, so we lost 15 points. Pojman calls this a big loss. The final possibility is that we do not use the death penalty and we are right that it does not deter murder, and so we lose no innocent lives but save the life of 1 murderer, which is worth 5 points. Pojman calls this a small win. Well, what is the best bet? Consider. We have no control over whether the death penalty actually deters crime or not. That is determined by human psychology. So we can't choose which columns we would like in the table. But we can choose whether or not we adopt a policy of using the death penalty. That means we have a choice between rows. Since we don't know whether the death penalty deters crime or not, we don't know which box we will end up in. So our best bet, according to Pojman, is to go with the choice that has the highest average payoff or utility, that is to say, the row with the highest value. The expected value of the row for using the death penalty is 10, and the expected value for the row of not using it is -10. So, according to this reasoning, we should use the death penalty. That is the essence of Pojman's position, as well as Vandenhaeg's, whose argument he uses or adapts. In what remains of the paper, he considers 2 objections to his position. First is that the gambling metaphor is misleading. Second is that since we have no reason to think that the death penalty deters, there's no more reason to use it in our calculation than anything else, such as tickling feet. We will look at Pojman's responses to these one at a time, and also consider one additional criticism regarding his choice of values for his calculation. According to this objection, Pojman makes a mistake with this analogy between gambling and using the death penalty. This is because the death of the criminal in the death penalty case is certain, while saving the lives of innocents through deterrence is not certain. Pojman's response is that the gambling metaphor is apt. Though he does not say so in these words, you can see the fact that the certainty of the criminal's death is taken into account when calculating the expected payoffs. We can do this when calculating the odds of gambling too, such as the cost of playing a slot machine or buying a lottery ticket. Pojman also asks us to imagine a case where we think a crazy person is about to set off a nuclear weapon. Suppose that there is a 50-50 chance that this person intends to set off a bomb that will kill millions, and you are a sniper who can kill him before he gets to the bomb. Do you take the shot? Pojman thinks that, given the risks, killing the man is the only moral and responsible and reasonable thing to do, even though his intentions are not certain. Pojman also asks us to consider the question in a different way to see if we should take the gamble. He asks us to imagine that the world were such that if we were to kill a convicted murderer, there would be a 50-50 chance that it would bring his or her victim back to life. It doesn't matter how this would work, through technology or magic or a strange world where the laws of nature are different. He asks us if we had a chance to bring back one of her or his victims by killing the criminal, would we do it? He thinks that we should, and that the intuitions of many of us would be that we would. He then asks what the difference is in a case where a different innocent person's life has a 50-50 chance of being saved. His implication is that if we say we would kill the criminal in the first case, we should do so in the second case as well. According to this objection, we have no reason to believe that the death penalty deters crime. Therefore, we have no more reason to use the death penalty in our bet than any other random method we might pick, such as tickling the criminal's feet with a feather, making him write "I will not murder families" on the chalkboard 1,000 times, or making her or him eat an apple every day for a year, or any other random thing you might think of. Since we have no reason to believe that any of these methods work, why choose one that does harm for our bet? Choose one that does not do harm or does less. Pojman's response is on the next slide. Pojman's response is as follows. According to Pojman, the death penalty is not in the same position as punishments like tickling feet or writing sentences, he says, because we have common sense reasons to think that the death penalty deters violent crime. He reasons this way. Premise 1. The more feared humane punishment deters more than the less feared one. Premise 2. The death penalty is more feared than life in prison without parole. Premise 3. The death penalty is a humane punishment. Conclusion. Therefore, the death penalty deters more than life without parole. He says that we have evidence that premise 2 is true by the fact that prisoners on death row try to save their lives. He does not say much to defend premise 3, except that society generally accepts it. Pojman also argues that there is good anecdotal evidence that the death penalty deters crime. He points to particular stories of criminals who have refrained from killing when doing so might have let them get away for fear of the death penalty, and other criminals who have refrained from using guns at all because of the death penalty. The details of these specific stories are in your reading, so you should reference that for the specifics of these stories. Another possible objection against Pojman's argument lay in his premises. Of course, the premises of any argument can be questioned as a way of attacking that argument, and that is a good place for you to look when you want to analyze the strength of an argument. One of his assumptions in this case seems like it might be a bit too strong, and his calculation relies on it. This is his premise is that if the death penalty deters, it deters at least 2 murders each time it is used. Pojman does not even consider the idea that even if the death penalty has a deterrent effect, it might be very small. For example, it might take several executions to deter a single murder. Maybe this is why the effects of the death penalty are so hard to detect. Watch what happens to the calculation if we say it takes 2 executions to deter a murder instead of each execution deterring 2 murderers. So here are our new premises. That we are essentially forced to bet one way or another on the death penalty by either having it or not. That we are morally responsible not only for what we do, but for what we allow to be done. That there is a reasonable chance, something like 50-50, that the death penalty for murder deters other murders, and that if the death penalty does deter murders, it takes 2 uses of it to deter 1 murder. That the life of an innocent person is at least twice as valuable as that of a murderer. That we will say that the life of an innocent person is worth 10, and that of a murderer is worth 5. This chart shows the new values with these premises. Notice that the values of the rows have shifted. The do not use row is now with the positive number plus 10, and the use row now totals a negative number minus 10, indicating that we should not use the death penalty. This uses Pojman's same calculating strategy, but just disagrees over how strong the deterrent effect of the death penalty is. Of course, Pojman could respond that he thinks that the effect would be stronger than that. Also, another way to change the values back into the death penalty's favor would be to say that an innocent's life was worth 4 times that of a murderer. The calculation can then go back and forth between one decision and another depending on how we play with values like the level of deterrence and the value of the life of an innocent relative to that of a murderer. So 2 points come from this. Even if one agrees with this calculation strategy, not knowing how much or even if the death penalty deters murder, some say it even promotes it, makes this calculation difficult. This makes the relative value of an innocent's life to that of a convicted murderer, combined with how likely one believes the system is to occasionally convict innocents, extremely important. If this number is high, the calculation will favor the death penalty. If it is low, it will not. And that ends this presentation. The reading for the con position on the death penalty will be Reinman's piece. It is a good companion piece to this paper because it addresses some of the premises, assumptions used in this paper. How well it does so is for you to critically evaluate, and hopefully share on the forums.